Hi guys, back to muscle again, and we're starting out on fuel, and this I've touched on before, so I'm just gonna go by these slides. I'm gonna let you look at them. They'll be posted because we've already talked about that phosphate being the fuel for moving muscle of the three phosphates of ATP. So I'm gonna let you look at that by yourself and move on to a different kind of muscle, and that is cardiac muscle. So we've been looking up to now skeletal muscle. And what we want to think about is, how is it different when you're talking about cardiac? How is it different when you're talking about the heart? So it's actually very similar. However, it's not multinucleated. There's not more than one nucleus. There's only one of them. And this tissue is very rich in glycogen and myoglobin. So glycogen is the storage, is the molecule that we use to store glucose. It makes sense that this heart that's beating cannot rest. And so you need to have constant fuel. So we're going to give it lots of glycogen. And a molecule called myoglobin that is going to be able to provide oxygen constantly, because again, this is a muscle that can't relax and has to live for 92 years, correct? That's what I'm shooting for. So it also has a large number of mitochondria. If you looked at the muscle cell that was a cardiac cell, 25% of the cell itself is occupied by mitochondria. It's desperately trying to make all that ATP for you, right? And as long as it can churn out the ATP, then it's going to keep on beating happily. It's completely resistant to fatigue. It cannot rest. If I had to choose to be a cell, it would not be a cardiac cell. So let's compare that to smooth muscle. Okay, smooth muscle is going to be in your intestine, it's in the organs. It's also got thin and thick filaments. It's also got myosin and actin, but they're not aligned the way they were so beautifully in these rows. And so you don't see striations on them. And the other important thing is that it can actually grow. It has mitosis. It can divide. It can divide and make more cells, because the pregnant uterus has to divide and make more cells. It has to grow. The other very interesting thing is that the movement of, like, this is a colon, the picture of the colon here, doesn't have to be as precise as it is in your fingers, right? Or in your arm or in your legs. So it can be not as perfect as long as it does one thing, which is move contents of the colon along. So it doesn't need direct innervation. It doesn't need every cell to be connected to a neuron that connects to the brain or to the spine, correct? It can be a little sloppier in the way that it functions. So the way that it functions is that you would have just one neuron, although it's sort of immersed, sort of floating in between a bunch of cells. And all of these regions, all the way along that axon, it can release neurotransmitter. So if it's able to release neurotransmitter and flood that area, then all of those cells are going to react. It does not work like that in skeletal muscle, because you want to be precise. You want to have the control of your fingers, of your hand, of your neck. So very different. This one is sort of the drip hose that sort of distributes broadly. So it releases a neurotransmitter. Many of those cells are stimulated. They stimulate each other, and there's a very low energy requirement because it's not fast and furious. It's going to be sort of slow and lethargic, right, when things move down your intestine. Make sense? That's the smooth muscle. Muscle, as I'm saying here, contracts slowly, it relaxes slowly, it enables the maintenance of tone. So tone, I haven't mentioned yet. Tone is the little bit of contraction that exists even while relaxed, right? Because you don't want it to be totally floppy. The example there I gave is that the empty stomach is not flaccid. It still has a shape to it. That's tone. Good. Oh, we're getting to the end here. Bodybuilding. How do you build bulk and muscle? Everybody asks me this during our classes. So there's no mitosis in skeletal muscle. You can't make more muscle. You can't make more muscle cells and get newer and newer muscle cells like the uterus could. No, you can't do that. So the way that it happens is that you put pressure on those cells to work harder and harder and harder because you're lifting these weights. They actually expand trying to do a better job, and they will split. And by splitting, you're creating mass, right? You're creating a greater volume. And some individuals believe that the cells can actually split. So it's different from mitosis, where it's cell reproduction occurring. It's just kind of like a growth and splitting if it were to happen. And that's how bodybuilding occurs. I also get asked a lot, what happens when you stop doing that? And what happens to those cells? So I assume that some of those myofibrils get reabsorbed, but because it is lost once you don't use it as much. But I don't know enough about that to tell you. I'm going to switch gears on you now and illustrate the excitation contraction coupling that I've been talking about already, where you had the thin filament, you had the thick filament, and all the steps that happen from the time that a neuron arrives, sends an action potential, to the time that it reacts. It's kind of like a big summarization of what I've been saying. So let's see. In this diagram, you have a motor neuron releases acetylcholine. So here's the neuron. It releases acetylcholine that dribbles down into that cleft that I'd mentioned before. And it generates current along the surface, the sarcolemma of the muscle. And here it is in red, traveling down, 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 down into the cell. And as it travels down, let me come back, see if I can illustrate it better. This is a better one. This is the T-tubule. So when I have an action potential is traveling down, 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 it finds this column to enter the cell in, and that's called the T-tubule. So it will travel down, and as it comes down, it will stimulate this receptor here, which is a sarcoplasmic reticulum. So I'm not going to go into too much detail other than action potential arrives, goes deep into the cell, and from going deep into the cell, it stimulates the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Sarcoplasmic reticulum is loaded with calcium, and what it will do is release the little green balls that here are showing or are to be calcium. Now look at the little green balls. They come down and they attach onto the troponin, correct? Troponin is going to move tropomyosin out of the way, and myosin will attach onto the actin and do the bicycle chain movement. And what used to be, look at this step 7 here, in this location is now moved. So it's gone from broader to narrower, and hence you have your contraction. So muscle contracts as long as the calcium is in the cytoplasm. Removing that calcium is going to stop that contraction. You have to look at this diagram quite a bit. See where I can put myself. The calcium is pumped out through something called, can I summarize this for you? Just an active transport pump. And that active transport pump is going to pump that calcium back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum and be ready for the next contraction. That's all you need to know. Big picture. So an action potential takes about 1 to 2 milliseconds, thousandths of a second, really, really fast. So that the current coming, current, zap, really fast. The actual contraction that results from that zap is much slower. It's 100 milliseconds, still pretty fast, but 100 times slower, right? 100 milliseconds. So all you need is one zap for it to start doing all its thing and then relaxing again. Or if you zap it again and again and again and again, it won't relax. It'll stay contracted. So the terminology that we use in physiology is one twitch. A twitch isn't what you do when you're falling asleep. It's in physiology, it's one contraction and relaxation cycle. So if you zap it and it's going to contract and it's going to relax, that's a twitch. So this is a diagram that shows a twitch, shows the membrane potential, which means current. Current comes fast. Current comes fast, and contraction comes slow. It takes a whole lot longer. Okay, so zap, and then slowly contract and relax. Now, if you don't want it to relax, you hit it with current over and over again, and this muscle of yours is going to stay like you're lifting something up, a weight. Hold, 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 because my brain is sending messages to it to hold, and it zap, 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 and I decide I'm not going to zap anymore. Down comes the arm. Okay, slower in the contraction than it is in the current. And that is the end of the great summary that you have for muscle. And with that, you should be so ready. Thanks, guys. Bye.